So tonight it's going to be a soft introduction into photography. We're going to have a look at some photography styles. So just to get you thinking about what you might like to photograph, we'll have a look at some photography styles, and we'll also have a look at some camera types then as well. We'll get a sense of what you guys are using. I think most of you are probably using DSLRs really on this course. Generally, the majority of students would be using DSLRs. We'll have a look at some other camera types that are out there as well that you might be using, and then we'll have a summary at the end, and we'll do our Q&A as well. Okay, so is everybody ready? Excellent, brilliant. Okay, so why do we want to develop our knowledge in photography? Well, it's really simple. Without skills and knowledge, you're always going to be stuck on that automatic mode, and we spoke about that a little bit earlier. Always going to be stuck on that A mode. And the automatic mode is an issue. It's a problem because we have no control. We can't influence the camera at all, and it's going to make decisions. How many of you are frustrated with the, with your automatic photographs? So a lot of us, that's where we're going to start as photographers. Yeah, I can see Naomi saying it there, Amanda saying it there as well. You're just not happy with the quality of the photographs that are coming in. That's why we're here. I mean, the camera is only a tool, guys, and like any craft or skill, you need to be able to master the tool before you can really master the craft. So throughout this course, we're going to be having a look at the technical aspect of it, so you can enhance your creative aspect of it as well. But let's do that by having a look at some styles of photography first of all. And this is an introduction to photography. So it's this lesson, we're going to help you to get thinking about some areas you might want to pursue. I always get asked by students, what style of photography do their photographs fall under? And the truth is, it's not so straightforward. I want you to think of photography like music. Music can make you feel many emotions all at once, and often music crosses many genres at one time. Think about the styles of music that you're into. So if you're into pop, maybe you're into metal, maybe you're into classic music, but we all know that these music genres, they tend to not fit any one style anymore. They cross over, they cross into lots of other different genres or take elements of other genres and so on. This is the exact same for photography. We want to understand all aspects of photography. So we'll have a look at some styles, and we begin to see throughout looking at these styles how they can kind of cross over as well. Okay, so some of the styles, every minute of every day we are exposed to photography and visual imagery in some shape or form, whether it's advertising campaign in your local department store, just looking at pictures of friends and family on a social networking site. Exploring these different styles will help us to understand how we can use them to communicate something to the viewer, whether it's a message, whether it's a story, whether we want to sell a project, or maybe we just see something beautiful and we want to try and capture it as it was. Photography is a form of communication, and the way we shoot and the way we photograph determines what our photography communicates. So we're going to be having a look at all these different areas. And you'll begin to see how they feed into each other as well. There's a huge range of styles, and a lot of these cross over into each other, but I'm going to highlight the main ones really. Most photographers have a particular style or a particular subject that they are drawn to, and I hope this lesson will help you guys recognize that certain styles or works by photographers, when you see something new. So if you're looking at some work by a photographer, you're not sure what kind of category it falls under, hopefully this lesson will give you a bit more of an idea. Okay, so first off, how many people have seen this particular photograph before? You might be familiar with this photographer, perhaps the most famous photographer, arguably the most famous photographer that ever was. Yeah, I can see lots and lots and lots of yeses coming in. Brian saying, "This is my favorite photographer." Ansel Adams. Ansel Adams' name synonymous not only with photography, but with landscape photography. Landscape photography is probably the most popular subject for photographers to shoot. And certainly for myself and the majority of photographers that I've encountered, this is where we would begin. And it's because it's something that you can do on your own. So when you're beginning to get into photography, it's an area that you could do on your own while you're practicing, while you're getting used to your camera. Usually the photographer is trying to represent a particular space and illustrate the beauty of natural environments here, like in this particular photograph. But landscape photography has a very broad definition, and it's not always large open landscapes like this filled with mountains, lakes and trees. Landscapes can be urban settings. Landscapes don't have to be attractive areas either. They can be industrial areas. They don't always have to show the beauty of natural environment. They can also be used to show something negative, such as like the environment impacted by humans or natural disasters and other things that have an influence on a space. This is a very iconic image, and I mean, Ansel Adams was the most accomplished photographer going. He developed a very complex system for his photographs. But we can achieve this with our photography as well. We get out there and we can start photographing landscapes. Our own local areas is a great place to begin with, and we can start to expand from there as well. How many of you are practicing landscape photography at the moment? Wow, the chat box has just gone crazy there with the amount of yeses coming in. And that doesn't surprise me. As I said, the majority of us would begin, with landscape photography. As I said, it's something that we can go out, we can practice ourselves as photographers. We can get out there, get used to our cameras and so on. It's a great way to get into photography. But it may not be necessarily the style that you most prefer. But landscape photography kind of, it expands from there. And, in recent years, drones have become massively popular and have opened up this other area of photography to us that in the past was only really available to very specialized photographers, and that's aerial photography. And aerial photography is, as it sounds, it captures images from above. Usually, as I said in the past, from like a helicopter or from an airplane. But now with access to drones, even though drones are still quite expensive, they're far, far cheaper than renting out a helicopter or trying to get access to a helicopter. So aerial photography can be any subject, from city scenes, from landscapes, in this case the city scene, just anything taken from the air. It's such a unique way of looking at the world and seeing things from a totally new perspective. This view of the world is not usually accessible to us or most people in real life. But as I said, with drones now and the popularity of drones, this is an area of photography which has grown massively. How many people are using a drone at the moment? Okay, majority of no's coming in. And I asked that question more and more I'm seeing yeses coming in on that. So they're still growing in popularity, drones. But I certainly know when I started this course and I was asking that same question, almost nobody was able to do this type of photography. But with the use of drones now, it's becoming much, much more accessible. But we don't have to get in the air. We can also stay on the ground. And we can look at architecture as well. And architectural photography, as you might have guessed, the subject is mainly buildings and structures that are visually interesting. You can see this is a great use of perspective here as well, simply looking up to get this really, really dramatic photograph. And, architectural photography, this can be an entire shot of a building or, this is almost an abstract approach to architectural photography. You can see it's looking at shapes. You've got these very kind of hard lines, with looking straight up at these buildings. But it can also be interiors as well as exteriors as well. We can photograph inside buildings and, you might be an architect, you might be an interior architect, and you might be using photography for your work as well. And this would be considered architectural photography. Photographers may shoot architectural photography for commercial reasons, for historical reasons, or simply just for creative reasons. You might have a love of architecture and you just want to capture it and be able to appreciate it through photography as well. Okay, and you can kind of see how landscape photography relates to all of this too. You know, I would see landscape photography as kind of like a header, and I would see these other areas, architectural photography, aerial photography, as kind of offshoots of landscape photography. You can begin to see the crossover of these genres, and indeed, you know, nighttime photography falls into this area as well. I can see lots of wows coming in on this particular shot. How many of you would you like to be able to achieve a photograph like this? Okay, I can see lots of yeses. Maureen would love to be able to do that. David, you're saying you want to as well. So is Mohammed. This is something I'm going to be able to show you how to achieve throughout this course as well. Does anybody want to tell me what type of effect is used? How do we achieve this particular type of photograph? What primary function on the camera would we use to create these light trails in the shot? Just waiting for some more answers to come in there. Khalid, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I can see lots of correct answers. Slow shutter speeds, a long exposure. You're absolutely right, guys. After dark, the whole world transforms and can look completely different than during the day. And it's a great way to capture a new side to an environment, you know, a subject that you might be familiar photographing. Night or long exposure photography is usually used to photograph anything when the light is very, very low or it's very dark. And I can see lots of people saying they want to capture northern lights. And that's something we will talk about throughout this course as well. But if you're unfamiliar with the term long exposure, don't worry at all. We will discuss this later in later detail in lesson 4 in particular. We'll go into the use of slower shutter speeds. Okay, so this image here has been shot quite late at night. We can see those streams of white and red light, and this is from the cars moving through the scene. And I can see lots of people mentioning tripods there as well. Yeah, absolutely. We would need to use a tripod in a particular area like this. So moving away from the landscape side of it, another area, probably the second biggest popular area in photography, is portrait photography. So quite often I find with photographers, most photographers enjoy all types of photography, but generally a lot of photographers seem to be divided about down the middle, whether they like to do landscapes or whether they like to do portraitures. And they're very different worlds in photography, really. Portraiture are people, or without a doubt, are probably the most popular area in subject in photography. Or second, arguably against after landscapes. People have always been the most interesting and intriguing subject for photographers and create the most interesting images for the viewer. You know, we have a natural curiosity and interest in other people, and portrait photography is a means of capturing this. You know, in very broad terms, it refers to photographing a person or a group of people to capture their expression, to try and capture their personality, their character, or their mood. And as you can see here, you're ranging from, you know, celebrity photography to maybe wedding portraits or just more candid style portraiture as well. Typically, but not always, the face is usually the focus of the image. You can have close-up images of the face, or you can have, as we can see here, more 3/4 length portraits, full body portraits, environmental portraits. It really crosses into lots of different types of photography. Portraits can be posed, or they can be natural, or they can be candid as well. And we'll have a look at some candid photography too. Portraits can be shot against simple backgrounds where the subject's face or body try to tell their story, and a person could be shot in a particular environment that reveals a lot more about who they are or what they do. If you think about a worker, for example, you might photograph somebody working in their environment, and this is a lot about who they are and so on. And candid photography is quite closely related to this. And it's not so much a genre or a category, but it's worth mentioning as a style. And I can see lots of people say, it's cute, such a cute photograph. Well, candid photography is usually used for capturing these little moments, these little things as they happen. And little moments between people are spontaneous things that just occur. Usually the subject isn't aware of the photographer, and the shots result in being very, very natural. And this style is excellent for capturing people at their most relaxed. And Candid in particular is great for family photography. How many of you are here because you want to take better photographs of your children or better photographs of your family? Yeah, universally yes is coming in on this one here. You can see Deborah saying, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and candid photography suits family so well, and I think the reason for this is that if you are the photographer of the family, it's a very important role that you are fulfilling as the photographer in your family, as your photographs are the ones that future generations will look back on. So you want to be able to take the best ones that you possibly can, so that people looking at them in the future are going to be able to enjoy them. If you are the photographer of the family, try to have your camera with you as often as possible, as the more you have it, the more your family and your friends as well will become relaxed too. And this results in great photographs, as you know, if the family or your friends are not even aware that you have the camera on you, they're going to be at their most relaxed, and you're going to get the best pictures of them as well. But Candid can be applied to most areas where you're photographing people as well, and indeed weddings are another area of this as well. Now, quite often when I show this photograph, I get some people laughing because people think this gentleman is sneezing. But no, this is a wonderful photograph of a father seeing his daughter, for the first time on her wedding day. It's a really terrific candid photograph, and weddings are great for this style of photography. And again, the main reason for this is that usually people getting married, they're not natural models, and they might feel quite awkward. And if you've any experience shooting a wedding, you'll be familiar with this. They might be awkward in front of the camera, trying to get people to pose. It can be quite difficult, especially when you're managing groups of people. And, shooting them candidly, shooting them when they're not aware that they're being photographed. This allows them to forget about, posing and so on, to just relax and enjoy themselves. And this is where you'll generally get the best photographs as well. And this shot shows how candid style can capture these little intimate moments between people that you probably wouldn't get, if you tried to pose these people as well. And I can see a few wedding photographers saying that, there's a lot more demand for candid style weddings and so on. So if this is an area that you're thinking about getting into, it's certainly achievable. We can definitely help you out with this as well throughout the course. But think about approaching it in this way as well as the traditional way too. And portraiture photography, it leads into other areas such as fashion as well. And this is a really complex, high fashion photograph. You may have heard of this photographer before, Annie Leibovitz, incredibly famous photographer. If you're familiar with Rolling Stone magazine, she did all these really, really famous photographs of all these different celebrities. Meryl Streep comes to mind, as she was at the Golden Globes there the other evening. But it's a terrific photograph of her from Annie Leibovitz. But Annie Leibovitz, very, very famous fashion photographer as well. And a lot of people, I can see straight off, asking, is this related? Is there Photoshop used in this image? Absolutely, yes. So there's a little bit of Photoshop going on in this particular shot as well. But these elements would have been photographed separately too, and would have been brought together as well. Fashion photography is probably, it's one of the styles or types of photography that we see the most. As we see it everywhere we go, in books and magazines, even if we're sitting in the doctor's or the dentist's waiting room and you just pick up a magazine, you're going to see all these fashion, photographs. So if we're to talk about the function or the purpose of fashion photography, we would probably say it's really the use of images to sell a product. And we spoke about how photography is communicating a message, but it's also used to sell. And this is something that we need to be very aware of as photographers. And this could be anything from clothes, fragrances, footwear, accessories, watches, and so on. The main objective is to entice the viewer to purchase a product. And images are usually, as you can, like in this example, they're usually really creative. They're usually visually interesting to grab our attention. And of course, this visual interest is what draws the viewer in and attracts them to the project. and it's trying to glamorize a project or a lifestyle. However, even though this style of photography has a particular function, it can still be really creative and really visually interesting. And quite often, because of this, very famous fashion photographers would also be very famous conceptual and art photographers as well. And we'll look at that in just a moment too. But probably one of my favorite things about fashion is that it lends itself to so many environments and locations. You get to work with lots of other people as well. You can use anything from a studio setting to an urban environment, run down buildings, or be extremely creative, like in this case as well. A lot of work goes into this type of photograph, but you can also have very straightforward black and white studio photographs to do with fashion as well. Okay, and on that kind of creative side of it too, has anybody heard of this particular style before? Conceptual photography. I'd just ask you a question, guys. What's a concept? So it's a bit of a tough one. How would we define a concept? What would we call a concept? Okay, just waiting for a few more answers. Sabrina, you've got it spot on there. Yeah, absolutely. Jim, you're spot on there as well. So is George and Abdul. Yeah, a concept is an idea. Okay, so concept is an idea. So you might have an idea for a photograph that you want to make, that you want to create. And it might not be so straightforward to go out and photograph it. And this is where conceptual photography comes in. Conceptual photography is generally something that we might construct. All throughout the history of photography, there's always been arguments as to whether photography qualifies as art or not. And pretty much in the last 20, 30 years, this argument is totally dissolved, because technically photography is an art form, and because it's a creative and a visual process. But this particular category usually refers to images, or the collection of images where the photographer is trying to convey a particular idea or concept. Really good photographic work will always provoke an emotion in the viewer, and that emotion can be joy, it can be sadness, or it can be fear. And the work can be completely fictional, but it gets the viewer's mind racing as to who these people are, what's going on in the photograph, and so on. So, for example, here, I'll just go back there. So these images come from a pair of photographers called Shauna and Robert Park Harrison. And this work here, they've created a totally fictional world where the character is trying to harness the natural elements in order to survive this dark and desolate world. And again, a little bit of Photoshop would be used here as well. But also, these elements would have been photographed separately and brought together too. So quite a lot of work going in here as well. When you create these types of photographs, you don't always have to capture reality. And just like a book or a movie, you have the freedom to create your own stories and create totally fictional images that tell a story. But there is other ways we can approach this as well, this type of photography. And this is where we would also use the term fine art. And fine art photography can cross genres as well. And these are some of my favorite photographs from one of my favorite photographers, a Japanese photographer named Hiroshi Sugimoto. And what Sugimoto has photographed here are full movies. So this is a really great idea that he came up with, where he photographed these movies. These are full 90-minute or 2-hour movies that he photographed with a long exposure. And because it's such a long exposure, all the images on the screen appear as just white. So this work is about time. It's about all these images passing in front of us. It says a lot about time. But more than this work is also about the cinemas that he was photographing as well. And as you can see here, we've a variety of cinemas, very elaborate cinemas, almost like cathedrals if you wanted to compare them to something as grand as this, but also the drive-ins as well. And drive-ins are something that are not so much around anymore. So in a way, he was also documenting these cinemas and the decline in these really grand cinemas as well. This is where this crosses genres into another area, which is documentary photography. And documentary photography is an area where the photographer is exploring a particular subject to highlight and tell its story. I spoke about portraiture earlier on, about photographing a worker in their environment. And this work comes from a very, very renowned photographer named Sebastião Salgado, master of black and white and a master of documentary photography as well. And he did all this work on workers. It's a book called Workers. He's photographing these oil workers, and you can see how dramatic this particular photograph as well. Documentary photography will try to represent the subject as accurately as possible in the pictures. This accurate representation is what we would call objective. So as photographers, when you're working in this type of area in documentary photography, you want to try and photograph it in an objective manner. And this means you are trying to leave your own personal views and opinions out of when taking the pictures. It's like if you're watching the news. The news should be objective. It shouldn't influence your opinion. It should just present you with the facts. Documentary photography can also be positive as well. You know, it can tell stories of new discoveries in nature and science, or the achievements of individual groups of people. You know, this is typically the style of photography that we'd see in National Geographic, and I can see lots of people mentioning that already. Some of the photographers there from National Geographic. I'm sure we're all familiar with that. Are we all familiar with National Geographic, guys, as a magazine? It's a publication a lot of you would have grown up with, and we're all, I can see lots of people saying that the channel as well and the nature documentaries. Absolutely. And this type of photography is the kind of photography you'd find in that magazine as well. And documentary photography can be used to tell stories as well. You know, we can put these images together to try and tell a narrative. You know, almost like a movie where we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we can see here in this work by Corey Arnold, he was documenting the Alaskan fishermen. If you're familiar with that show, Deadliest Catch, on Discovery Channel, I love that show. That you might be familiar with that. Yeah, I can see lots of people saying that there already as well. Deadliest Catch. So it's a very similar idea to that, but instead Corey Arnold photographed it instead. You know, and we can see here there is a story happening here. We have what we would call an establishing photograph here with the ship. And then we have the workers who are working on the ship, the harsh conditions that they're working in, but then also the joy of the catch as well. You know, you can see the fun side here as well. And if you're familiar with these fishermen, you also know that getting the catch like that means they're also going to make a lot of money from it too. So you can understand why they are so happy there as well. But are you beginning to get a sense, guys, of how it all works? How these genres can cross over with each other? You're probably getting lots of ideas here from it as well. Excellent. Brilliant, brilliant. Then we've just got a few more to have a look at. We'll then get into looking at some of your cameras then as well. Closely related to documentary, we'd also have photojournalism or war photography as well. And photojournalism is quite similar to documentary in that you're usually highlighting a particular subject or an issue. And with photojournalism, however, where it differs from documentary is that generally you're trying to tell a story in a photograph. And if you're with photojournalism, you haven't got much time to convey the message. If you're looking at a photograph in a newspaper, you know, the photographer wants you to be able to look at that photograph and understand straight away what the message is from that photograph. Like here, with this photograph from a very famous war photographer named Robert Capa. This is a photograph taken on the D-Day landings, in 1944. And this is actually from a roll of film that got destroyed. He had very few shots from it, but this particular photograph survived, and its motion, its blurriness, its hecticness kind of conveys how that was for the soldiers on that day. We've also got Don McCullen's photograph here as well, showing the drama, and this is a photograph from the streets of Belfast, the drama on the streets of Belfast during the Troubles as well. And we can get this simply by looking at these photographs. Straight away we know that these are photographs about conflict and so on. A very dangerous area to work in as well, so you do want to take care if this is a particular type of photography you want to get into too. But photojournalism also kind of relates to street photography as well. Street photography, it's a bit of a harder area to get in nowadays, and really if you're interested in street photography, I'd strongly recommend that you have a look at the kind of laws in your country as well. Some places it's very much frowned upon going out there photographing people on the streets, so do be aware of that if you do want to go out there and photograph. Some places it's quite rude, other places it's absolutely fine. Yeah, I can see a couple of people saying there, some of our Saudi Arabian students there saying, it's not something that you generally do there, so do be aware if you're getting into street photography. But this is an area of photography that I really love, as it lends itself to just getting out there, being on your own as a photographer and enjoying your photography. Street photographers tend to walk around your local locations, or maybe if you're traveling as well, and just shoot as they go. And really the idea of street photography is just to document the everyday, to document everyday life. And here we have two photographs from two absolute masters of street photography, Martin Parr, a British photographer, and this is from a series of work called Last Resort, where he was photographing all the different resorts around the UK. And you can see these are destinations that people will go to during the summer. Lots of humour in Martin Parr's work. But then we also got Henri Cartier-Bresson, and he coined the phrase the decisive moment. You might have heard that phrase before, the decisive moment where all the elements come together to create this perfect photograph. And here you can see he's interested in the shape here of these stairs leading down on the streets of Paris, just this cyclist going by to add an element of drama to the shot as well. And moving on, we can also have a look at sports and action photography as well. A really, really dramatic photograph here. And does anybody want to tell me what type of shutter speed might we have used in this particular photograph? Excellent. I can see James saying, yeah, very, very fast. Very, very fast shutter speed here. And how can we tell that? How can we tell that a very fast shutter speed has been used in this shot? Okay, see Caroline, yeah, you're spot on. Tim's right there as well. Andreas, yeah, absolutely correct answers. The waves everything's very sharp. We can see from the waves just how sharp it is. It's like they've been frozen. So the motion has been frozen here. And this is a really, really dramatic photograph of the surfer here as well. You might also use a very fast mode on your camera to capture this type of shot here as well. And we'll be looking at this throughout the course as well, how you can get these types of photographs too. And we've just got a couple of more to have a look at. Wildlife photography would also be related closely to to action and that as well, and generally that you'd be using very long lenses, zoom lenses, telephoto lenses. You need to be very, very, very fast as well. But you can get very, very creative with it too, like in this photograph from Andre Bonfrey. You can see this kind of creative with the heart shape of, I think these are macaque monkeys, in really, really cold climates, but you got that heart shape of the face there as well. This is actually an award-winning photograph too. And finally, just two more to have a look at. Macro close-up photography. We can get really creative with this, use macro photography, get really, really close. This is a really fun idea as well. Macro photography is about getting in closer to the subject or enlarging the subject, and quite often is used for photographing insects and so on. Flowers would be a really, really popular area for macro photography too. Usually requires some specialized lenses, but we will have a look at these lenses in lesson 2. And then finally, food photography as well. How many of you enjoy cooking? So I'm just laughing there, David saying, no, keep me away from the kitchen. Well, food photography it's very similar to fashion photography as well. Fashion photography is usually, as we said, we're trying to sell a project. With food photography, we want to make the viewer hungry. We want to make the food look as appetizing as possible. And getting creative with food photography like this really, really will entice the viewer as well. So maybe you're a cook, maybe you have a blog and you want to photograph your meals and so on as well. quite often as photographers, we'll have a passion in another area as well, not just photography. So being able to bring these together is a really terrific thing to do as well. So what do we think, guys? What type of style would you like to master? Okay, brilliant. Yeah, it's lots and lots of people saying landscape, portraits. Excellent, excellent, great. We will be covering those in depth throughout the course. Lots of sports coming in there as well. The action shot, yeah, it was a terrific photograph. Brilliant stuff. Excellent, great answers, guys. Well, this is something we will be having a look at throughout the course. We'll get you to a level you're going to be able to apply all of these skills to whatever area of photography it is that you are interested to. So, we've spent enough time having a look at these different styles. Let's have a look at some cameras now as well. Let's get a sense of what cameras you are using. So it's really important to understand the capabilities of our equipment, of the equipment that we are using. Does everybody know what type of camera they have? Now, I'm not asking about the manufacturer or the model, but what type of camera are you using? Is it a mirrorless camera? Is it a point and shoot? Is it a DSLR? Just wait a few moments there just to see some answers coming in. Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, the majority of people, looks like, are using DSLR cameras, digital single lens reflex cameras. That's excellent. If you have purchased one of those recently, or you're using one of those recently, this course really is designed to help you to get the most out of those cameras. But if you have a point and shoot camera, if you have your mobile phone, I see lots of people saying that as well, you're still going to get so much from this course as well if you're using those cameras as well. They might be a little bit more limited in their functionality, but you will still get a huge amount from those as well. So in this section, we'll have a look at some of the most common types of cameras on the market and the differences between them as well. As there's so many brands out there and models on the market, we'll be discussing these in more general terms and not brand specific, but the cameras we'll be having a look at are all pretty standard. You should really see your own one mentioned here as well. Before we do that, let's have a look at some of the different terminology or the names used to describe certain features. And this is a big part of this course as well. We'll be increasing your photographic vocabulary too. Okay, so we'll be helping you to understand these different buttons and how to speak in the language of photography as well. Okay, so now don't worry if this is not the type of camera that you have, but the components I'll be mentioning are common to most cameras. Okay, so the first thing is to get familiar is with your viewfinder. So you're going to hear me talk about the camera's viewfinder quite a lot. And your camera's viewfinder is very, very simple. It's where you look through the camera to compose your photographs. And in this particular case, you look through the camera, you'll actually see what you're seeing through the lens. And I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in a moment. But for now, the key term is your viewfinder. This is your camera's viewfinder. The next component to get familiar with, and you'll hear me talk about it a lot as well, is your camera's LCD, your liquid crystal display. If you're using a point and shoot, a mirrorless camera, bridge camera and so on, the majority of these cameras won't have a viewfinder. They might just have the LCD on the back instead. Or you might have also what's known as electronic viewfinder as well. And we'll speak about that in a moment too. Is everybody still with me? Is everybody, is this making sense so far? Excellent. Great stuff. Great stuff. Dean, I can say you're saying, yeah, very basic stuff so far. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know we have lots of different levels on this course, so some of you might be a little bit more advanced already where you are with your photography. Some of you might be total beginners to it as well. But as we continue on throughout this course, I think you'll find that it's really suited for all levels. But it is a basic introduction this evening, and we'll be getting a little bit more technical as we go on throughout these lessons. Now, so breaking down the camera a little bit more, and again, don't worry if this is not your exact model of camera. You might be using a different brand, but we've just got a Canon here at the moment. But just breaking down some of the components. First one, have a look at is your shutter button. So first, we have our shutter button. The shutter button is what we use to take the photograph. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this one. It's the one that takes the picture. Sometimes we refer to this as the exposure button as well, or the shutter release button too. On pretty much all cameras, when you press this button halfway down, the camera's lens begins to focus the shot for you, and when you fully press it, it actually takes the shot. And we'll be discussing this focusing in a future lesson. Just on that point as well, I know in the emails there as well, we give some tips in the emails, and one of the tips there was if you press the shutter button halfway down, it focuses. A lot of you responded as well, saying that, well, not if you use back button focusing. Well, that's very, very true. But for the moment, we'll keep things quite simple, and the shutter button is what we use to take the photograph, but if we lightly press it, it will also focus the photograph as well. So does everybody understand that? It's probably I think everybody understands. Yeah, lots and lots of yeses. So it's the very first thing we generally do is press that button and get used to using that button. We might have an LCD, a liquid crystal display screen on the top of our cameras as well. These can be really, really useful just to see very, very quickly what settings we might be using. We have a hot shoe on some cameras. Don't worry if your camera doesn't have one. A hot shoe is what we would use if we want to connect an external flash to the camera. But these are also used now as well. If you're into your video on your cameras, you might attach a microphone to hear this as well. And you can also, as I said, attach an external flash to these too. So hopefully you know your camera and you're familiar with some of these main components. We will get much more in depth into these in lesson 2. But the main types of cameras that we're going to be having a look at are point and shoot cameras, DSLRs, bridges, mirrorless cameras, medium format cameras, we'll mention briefly, and of course we can't forget about our smartphones as well. Now, just before we move on, I do see that we're coming up to the hour. So I know some of you may need to head off. That's absolutely fine. If you do need to leave us at this stage, you will be able to catch up on the recordings in your student login area. That'll be made available for you tomorrow afternoon at some stage. You'll be able to catch up on the lessons then in your own time, the parts that you've missed. Typically the lessons are an hour long. Obviously, as you saw at the start of the lesson, we had that little bit of housekeeping to do, so that ate up a little bit of time. So I hope you are able to stay with us, but if you have to head off, don't worry. Okay, so is everybody still with me, guys? Fantastic, brilliant, excellent. So let's dive into it. The first one we'll have a look at is our point and shoots. How many of you are using a point and shoot camera at the moment? Good, good. I see a lot of people saying they use them as a secondary camera. Yeah, brilliant. A lot of photographers will do that now. So you might have your DSLR camera, but you might carry a second camera around with you as well. And a lot of people will carry around a point and shoot camera. As the name states, with these you simply point and shoot with a camera like this. You don't need very much knowledge on the technical aspect of photography to operate one of these. And they can be often quite limited in the technical aspect of it as well. That will give you the creative control that you might be after. They usually don't have a manual mode. Some more advanced compact cameras like the Sony RX series will have more functions and more manual options on them as well. But really what these cameras are designed, these cameras are simply just for snapping and documenting, capturing events, places on a night out. You put it into your pocket, you're at a party and so on. In general, they'll have a built-in flash, and so they don't really require too much thought in terms of the technical part of it, but you can still get creative with them as well. It's all about how you approach your photograph with these cameras, how you decide to photograph in terms of the angles you might use and so on. They're really, really great camera to use, but unfortunately they are beginning to essentially die off, I guess, with the rise rise and rise and rise of smartphones as well. We're seeing less and less of the point and shoots out there. But if you are using one of these are a great camera. To really get into your photography, most of us would have started on a camera like this. Now, moving up into the DSLRs, or digital single lens reflexes. How many of you are using a DSLR? Yeah, the chat box has just exploded there. Okay, so I think it's safe to say the majority of us are using the DSLR. Don't worry if you're not using a DSLR at the moment. Perhaps you're thinking about buying a DSLR in the future as well. And this course will help you make a decision on that. And certainly we here, and myself and the support team would be able to help you on that side of it as well. DSLR cameras are, without a doubt, the most popular cameras among professionals and photography enthusiasts. They're very, very high quality, produce really high quality images and have incredible functionality. These cameras will give you fully manual mode. That allows you to bypass all the automatic functions and take full control of the cameras. It's like driving your car in fully manual, automatic, or not instead of automatic. As your education in photography progresses, this extended functionality will become more important to you. And at some point you will probably consider one of these cameras if you're not already using one of them. It just gives you the ability to manually change your aperture, your shutter, your ISO, and really importantly, you can change your lenses as well. So you can change out your lenses, and this will mean you can get different lenses for different functions, different scenarios, and so on. And it also means you can get much higher quality images. And at the end of the day, to use a tired old phrase, the end of the day, image quality is the thing that's most valuable to photographers. Full control and image quality come together to help us produce the highest quality photographs that we can achieve. So, with DSLRs, there is some drawbacks to them. They can be expensive. All the extra accessories that we can buy, such as the flashes, the extra lenses and so on, can really add up. And they can also become very, very heavy because of that as well. But ultimately, if you're after the highest image quality, a DSLR, a digital single lens reflex, is the way to go. Now, you might be wondering, what does digital single lens reflex mean? Well, digital single lens reflex, to break it down, the D in DSLR simply means digital. That's all it means. So you might be familiar with SLR cameras if you were shooting on film in the past. And SLR stands for single lens reflex. Okay, so SLR cameras have been around for about 100 years or so, but did not fully become adapted as a preferred type of camera until about the 1930s, with the rise of street photography and photojournalism really during that period. The key concept of a DSLR or an SLR camera is that when you look through the camera's viewfinder, you are looking directly at what the camera sees. You're looking through the camera's lens. This means that when you look through the viewfinder, you will see the scene exactly as you want to capture it, at least in terms of the composition. So the light enters through the lens. We have a mirror in the camera. The light hits the mirror. It's bounced up through what's called the pentaprism. So we can see the mirror here, and the light is bounced all around this device in the camera called the pentaprism, and it comes out the viewfinder and we see the image as it is. So the light enters through the lens, hits the mirror, goes up through the pentaprism, and it comes out the viewfinder and we see the scene as it is. Does everybody understand that? Excellent. Excellent, excellent. So that's the single lens part, okay? The reflex part is something different. The reflex part refers to the way that the mirror actually flips up when you take the picture. So when you're looking through the camera, the mirror inside is in its down position, allowing us to see what we're photographing. But when we take the shot, what happens when we take a photograph with a DSLR? Yeah, excellent, brilliant stuff, guys. Yeah, Donald, you're totally spot on. everything goes black for a moment. Everything goes black for a second or for how long the exposure is. And that is because the mirror opens up and allows the light to pass through. So the light goes through, the mirror goes up, and the camera or the light hits our camera sensor and the image is formed. When the exposure is finished, the mirror comes back down and the shutter closes again and our photograph is finished. So if you've ever wondered why everything goes black for a moment when you take the shot, it's because the reflex part of SLR, it's when the mirror opens up, allows the light to pass through and to hit the sensor. I will be looking at this a little bit more in detail as we continue on. So here's just another view of this as well, of the whole process. You'll be able to have a look at this in the toolkits in the slides. And that's what the pentaprism looks like as well. A really odd looking piece of glass really, that's within your DSLR. So it allows the light to bounce all around and so we can see things the way it should be. So with our DSLRs as well, here's just a view of the mirror. So if you ever take off the lens, you'll be able to have a look at the mirror. You'll see the mirror in the camera. When we press the shutter button or exposure button, the mirror opens up just to give you a front view and we can see our camera's sensor. And this is where the image begins to form. So that's a very brief way of how our DSLR cameras work. So is that new information? Is that something that you were aware of with your DSLR cameras? It's a very quick run through of how the camera actually works. Liam, you're saying, a light bulb moment. Excellent, Liam. Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, now, looking at some other types of cameras, it does work a little bit differently. So some of you may be using what's called a bridge camera, or some people refer to them as hybrid cameras as well. A bridge cameras or hybrid cameras, these are cameras that essentially have dual functionality. They'll have a lot of the functionality of a DSLR camera, but they'll also have all the convenience of a compact camera as well. The biggest difference with something like this, with a bridge camera, is that we cannot change the lenses on them. So with a bridge camera, generally there's a lens that we can zoom in and out. We usually have a really amazing zoom range on a camera like this. The zoom range is now, like, if you're familiar with the Nikon P900 series, they've got something like 85 times optical zoom on them now, which means that you get 85 times magnification, 85 times zoom on that lens, which is incredible, absolutely incredible, and incredibly convenient, especially if you're into doing wildlife photography and so on. Having that zoom range at your disposal is invaluable, it's something you actually can't really achieve using a DSLR. But we'll be speaking about that a little bit more in detail in the next lesson. They are a little bit more limited in terms of their functionality compared to a DSLR. You will still have manual functionality on them. But what you might find if you are using one of these cameras is that they won't have as many aperture stops on them. They may not have as many shutter speeds available to them as well. But we'll speak about all these terms as we progress on throughout this. Don't worry if you don't understand your apertures or your shutter speeds just yet. It'll all become clear as we continue on. Now, mirrorless cameras. How many of you are using a mirrorless camera at the moment? Fantastic. I could see Leanne saying you've got an X Pro 1 at the moment. Well, Leanne, that's a fantastic camera. So Leanne is talking about the Fuji cameras. That's a mirrorless camera. Mirrorless cameras have exploded really in popularity over the last few years, and mainly due to their convenience. Mirrorless cameras operate in a very, very similar way to DSLRs, but as you might have guessed from the name of them, they don't have a mirror inside of them the same way that our DSLR cameras have. So with a mirrorless camera, because they remove that part, the mirror in the cameras, they're much, much smaller. So they're much lighter than our DSLR cameras. The size, they're much, much smaller as well. But they will allow you to take the lenses off and attach other lenses to them as well. and this makes them incredibly useful and incredibly convenient. They'll also have the full range of functions available to them as well that you'll find on your DSLR cameras too. Your fully manual modes and so on will all be available to you on a mirrorless camera. Now, I have one of these myself. I've got an Olympus OMD EM10. If anybody else is using one of those cameras, a great little mirrorless camera. And I have to say, where I find these cameras to absolutely excel in particular is if you are into your street photography, or if you are looking for a camera that you can carry around every single day, and weight is an issue for you. Really, a mirrorless camera might be a really good option for you to have a look at. So definitely worth investigating. With mirrorless cameras, however, you are paying as much for them as you would for a DSLR. So it is something to consider. Mirrorless cameras are coming a long, long way in the last few years. The quality is getting a lot better, but it would still be a little bit behind your DSLR cameras. But if you do want more information on mirrorless cameras, have a look at the gear guide in the toolkits. As I said, you'll all get those toolkits. Have a look at that. You'll see me talk about these a little bit more. And indeed, you'll be able to email us as well, and we can give you a little bit more advice on them too. Now, I can see hundreds and hundreds of questions coming in there as well. We will do a Q&A as well at the end of the lesson. So we're nearly at the end there, guys. So just hang on a few more moments and we'll be able to try and get to your questions at the end as well. Just a couple of more questions or slides to have a look at. So with mirrorless cameras and bridge cameras, their viewfinders work slightly differently. Because we have no mirrors in the cameras, essentially what we have is called an electronic viewfinder, or an EVF, an electronic viewfinder. And it's essentially just a small little screen that we would see through the viewfinder instead of seeing a reflected image going through the pentaprism and back out towards us. Okay, so it's just a little electronic viewfinder that we see instead. Very, very straightforward. You can see by taking out the mirror that it makes the camera a lot smaller than the DSLRs. Okay, now, so medium format cameras I'll mention very, very briefly. Medium format cameras are only used at the very highest end by professional photographers, and this is due to their extremely high cost. Now, some of you might be familiar with Hasselblad. I can see a lot of people saying ooh already there. These guys cost thousands, tens of thousands of euro. They are extremely high quality due to their much larger sensor sizes, and we'll talk about these in a future lesson, than all the other cameras that we've looked at. They have much larger sensors, and larger sensor ultimately means better image quality. But because of this, you can be paying anywhere from 10 to 40,000 euro or dollars or pounds for these types of cameras. They're extremely expensive. Now, a lot of companies like Fuji, like the GX1 here, which is a brand new camera, Fuji are looking at trying to bring the cost down in these types of cameras. This is the camera they announced there quite recently, a medium format camera, and ultimately these are going to be able to take far higher quality photographs, and these would be used by the very, very top photographers out there, but incredibly expensive. Hugely expensive. You wouldn't see them used so much for things like sports or wildlife, but especially within fashion and things like advertising is where you typically see these medium format cameras being used. And finally then, just before we wrap up, our smartphones. So smartphones, these have opened up the world of photography like no other camera before. Last year, more photographs were taken alone in 2016 than in every other year of photography put together, which is absolutely incredible. And think about that. Every other year of photography put together, last year more photographs were taken in that single year. Trillions upon trillions upon trillions of photographs are now taken. And this is due to smartphones. And it's due to the ease of access to share photographs through smartphones. So, your Facebook, your Instagram, your Snapchats, all of this, because we could just take photographs so easily and we could share them so easily as well. Smartphones have cemented their place in photographic history. And the quality of smartphone cameras has massively increased over the last few years. And really, they are dominating and starting to replace things like the point and shoot cameras and so on. And these are great as well because everybody, at this stage, more or less, is using a phone with a camera on it. Whether you have something that is advanced as the iPhone and so on. You may not have something as advanced as that, but we generally all are using a camera or a smartphone that has some type of photographic ability on them as well. Where these phones lack really is in the ability to add lenses onto them and so on. You can buy little attachments and that, but really they're not the same. They can help though, but it also comes down, we've got such small lenses and smaller sensors as well. Quality is just not as good as what we would expect from a DSLR. But that's fine because most of the time when we take photographs with these types of cameras, we are going to be putting them online. We are going to be sharing them, in a digital environment rather than actual print. And so for most cases, generally, it's absolutely okay. So, we've looked at all of these different cameras and I can see lots of people saying, should I buy this, should I buy that? Don't worry, we'll talk about that in a moment. But really, any camera you can take a great photo. You just have to know how to use it. The best camera you can use is the one you have. Any camera that you are using at the moment, as we go on throughout this course, you will be able to take a great photo. You'll be able to take a perfect photograph. You just have to know how to use it. Now, I know I've kept you way over time, so I really appreciate your patience, guys, for this first lesson. But we've just got a little bit just before we finish up and get to our Q&A. If you do have to head off, don't worry, that's absolutely fine. As I said, you can catch up on the recordings in your student login area tomorrow. You'll also have the toolkits there to start reviewing there as well. And you can join us then for lesson 2. But let's just have a quick summary. We had a look tonight at different styles of photography, and I hope that got your brains going. I hope that got you thinking about some areas that you might like to go and photograph yourself. Then we had a look at some different camera types as well, and just the very, very basic functions on your cameras too. Okay, so congratulations, you've laid the foundations, you completed your first photography lesson. It's going to get more technical, it's going to get more creative. So if you found it a little bit basic this evening, I fully understand that. It is an introduction into photography, but I do hope that you've joined us for lesson 2 as well, where we really begin to get into your different lenses, and it gets a little bit more technical, but not too difficult. And we are here to learn. We are here to learn how to capture perfect pictures.